Hello, patrons.
And all you dead people.
Reaper, get it right, you bonehead.
Alright. And all you carnies. Sheesh.
I am Creepy Clown Girl.
And I am Reaper's Horror. We've searched far and wide to bring you a second helping of stories told by masked horror narrators.
Some old, some new.
And some dead.
Welcome to the Masks of Horror 2. Please enjoy.
Tender Flesh. Written and narrated by Sabian Lockhart, aka L.W. Sutton, aka my channel name, Cleaving Thought From Bone. Mommy says I'm on a special diet because I'm a special person. I know she loves me a lot, but I wish I could just be like all the other kids sometimes. I find myself wishing I could have some of that school pizza or participate in parties when somebody brings cake, but I can't. Mom says it's because of my allergies. This one time, my friend Evan snuck me one of his cupcakes that he had brought in. Evan was always nice to me. He had this weird-looking birthmark on his cheek that all the other kids would tease him for. I didn't mind. Even though he was nice enough to give me a cupcake anyway, I had to sneak it out of class and into the bathroom to eat it, or the teacher would have taken it away. I knew I shouldn't. I knew that it was a bad idea, that I could really hurt myself, but I couldn't resist. It was like I had never tasted anything sweet before in my life. I marveled at the fluffy texture and the creamy, candy-like frosting, and you know what? I was fine. In fact, I ran home early that day after school, energetically through the front door to tell Mommy what I had done and the result. I was thrilled because I thought this meant I was no longer allergic to at least one thing and that she would be happy too. Mommy hit me. Mommy slapped me across the face, telling me that I had done wrong. I tried to tell her that I was fine, that I had no reaction to the cupcake, but she didn't seem to care. Only repeated that I got lucky and that I was to stick to my strict diet. She asked who I had gotten it from, and I told her Evan. Mommy didn't say much after that, only finished preparing for her and I a lean cut of what she told me was pork, and a mixture of fried grains and beans. Don't get me wrong, I love Mom's cooking, but every night it's the same thing. A cut of gamey tasting pork, a fried mixture that looked a lot like brown tar and had the texture of breakfast grits. I wish I was like everyone else. The following day, once again I headed off to school. The day passed as a usual one. No birthday parties or events from which I could sneak food from. However, I took note that my friend, Evan, was not at school that day. I figured that maybe, since the day before was his birthday, that maybe he was allowed to have a day off. Lucky him. But then, he was absent the next day, and the day after that. And I didn't know why, but no one seemed to know where he was. I remembered thinking, he's at home, just go check at home. But I began to realize that maybe he wasn't there either. This seemed peculiar to me, and it reminded me of so many instances and people I've met in my short life. A few years ago, Mommy met a man who was really nice to me. Andrew was his name, and he played with me all the time. We'd watch movies together, and he'd make me popcorn. He even taught me to ride a bike. Then, one day, Andrew just stopped coming over. he didn't live with us or anything. He always came over every day. After a few days of him not coming by, I asked Mommy where he was one night at dinner, and if Andrew was ever going to come play with me. Mommy told me that I probably wouldn't be seeing too much of Andrew anymore. This immediately made me very sad and confused. He was my friend, the first real father figure I could remember, and now he was just gone. I asked Mommy why, but she just told me to never mind and eat my dinner consisting of meat and mushy, gritty grains. I wanted to know more. I wanted Mommy to tell me why, but she just told me something along the lines of his free time being too consuming or something like that. I had hoped that maybe someday he would just come back around to see me then, because I liked him. But sadly, he never did. It was at this time that I was startled out of my internal recollections by the sound of my name being called. It was the teacher, and standing next to her was a policeman. My teacher told me that he wanted to talk with me. When I walked up to the man, he asked me if that would be all right, and I said that it was. He seemed really nice, so I was okay talking with him. He led me out into the hall of the school and towards the guidance counselor's office, one I would soon find to be empty. As we walked, I continued forward with my internal thoughts regarding the years prior. I also once had this really great aunt. Aunt Linda, I think her name was. She was really nice and really pretty. Mommy and her were so close. They seemed almost like they were more than sisters. Plus, Mommy has red hair and green eyes. Aunt Linda had long black hair and brown eyes. I remember thinking that for sisters, they didn't look too much alike. But just like Andrew, Aunt Lydia played with me all the time, though my memories of when I was so young are still a little spotty. But I remember how happy she made me whenever she was around, and I remember that she was around a lot. Well, that is until she wasn't. One day, Aunt Linda just stopped coming over or being there. One day, I once again asked Mommy where she was, if she was coming over to see me. Mommy just told me that she moved, and she may not come back for a while. It makes me feel bad, but after a while of her never coming back to visit me and Mommy, I just kind of forgot about her. At this point, we had reached the guidance counselor's office. The cop was really nice to me, and I saw that my teacher had followed in behind us as well. I didn't even hear her following us down the hall. Even though the teacher was there, only the policeman talked to me. At first, he asked me my name and how old I was, asked me if I liked pets and what I liked to do. I told him I liked to color. And then, he asked me a whole bunch of other things, like when was the last time I had seen Evan, and if he had ever talked about running away. I told him no, that Evan was always really happy, and that his mom and dad were really nice. For some reason, he seemed to kind of ask me the same questions, but in different ways. I kept telling him the same thing, and I began to ask myself, why isn't he believing me? Did he think I was lying? Mommy said lying is bad, so I never lie. The policeman finished asking me questions and thanked me for talking to him. I told him he was welcome, and my teacher walked me back to my classroom. The rest of my day was okay. We had recess, and I talked with other friends, still only allowed to have the sandwich that Mommy had packed for me. Some kind of soft meat and mustard. It was okay. I even let my other friends have a bite. But when I got home, something happened that I did not expect. Mommy told me about my real daddy that night. She had never talked about my real father. We were sitting at the table for dinner, and I told her what had happened today about the policeman. Mommy smiled a little from the corner of her mouth and asked if he was nice to me. I told her yes. I told her that they asked me a bunch of questions about Evan, that they didn't know where he was. She told me that she was sure he would turn up and to start eating my dinner. But then I told Mommy about my reflections on Aunt Linda and Andrew and why they were gone too. They never came back, so maybe Evan wouldn't either. That's when I asked about Daddy, if he had just left one day too. Mommy told me that she really loved Daddy, and that she just couldn't get enough of him, that when they met, I was just a baby. This didn't make any sense to me, because how could I be a baby before Mommy met Daddy? But I just figured the stork bird thing just brought me to my daddy early. Mommy said that she loved Daddy so much that pretty soon he was all gone. She said she loved me too, but she loved me so much she wouldn't let me go with him. I asked Mommy what she meant. If she loved him, why would he be gone? I looked down at my plate of meat and mushy grits, and as I stared at the meal, specifically the meat upon my plate, I noticed the odd mark presented upon the seared portion of skin covering roasted flesh. I noticed what looked like an odd-looking freckle, weirdly shaped and oddly familiar. But before I could ask Mommy about it, she told me one more thing. She told me that someday I would grow up fit and strong, kind and tender, and that someday she wouldn't be able to get enough of me either, whatever that means.
Human Remains. Written by me, Doctor Gallow. I'm hungry. There's not a thing left to eat in this goddamn house. Nothing to fill me up. But don't worry. The pizza guy should be here soon. Let me tell you a story. I didn't believe the legends were true. The spider people, the 𝐺𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻. I didn't believe any of it. And even when I was on the plane to Japan, I was thinking about all those dumb fucks who tune into the show week in, week out, looking for monsters that don't exist. And I was thinking about their money too. Even while I was walking through that old forest and the guide refused to carry on, and I could see the fear in his eyes, I didn't buy it. I saw the vast tunnel of web going through the trees and bushes, but I still didn't believe while I stood there, taking pictures and trying to come up with some bullshit way to sell this fable to the subscribers. I don't think I even really started to believe when she ran out of that black hole faster than the devil on all 8 of her legs, a human foot at the end of each one. A woman-made spider. A spider made human flesh. She had light brown skin, and it felt soft when she wrapped herself around me. Her kiss was not. It felt like being stabbed with a hot knife, right in the middle of my chest. I lay there for hours, paralyzed and in agony, sure I was going to die. And then it was nighttime, and the cool air felt good on my fevered skin, and I managed to pull myself up. She was lying on her back nearby, her legs all bent inward over her belly like an old arthritic hand, clutching at nothing at all. I dreamed of webs and legs and fucking something unseen, and when it was over, I was lying in my hotel room. The fat fly that was buzzing around landed on my face while I lay sweating on the bed, and I instinctively slapped it flat against my forehead. Then, a new instinct kicked in, and I sucked its squishy remains off my fingers and swallowed them down. I waited for the gagging my mind warned me was inevitable, but it never came. By the time I stepped off the plane at JFK, I knew what was happening. My sides ached terribly, and 4 lumps had appeared, one on either side of my belly, and one at either side of my ribs. They felt infected, full of juice. They had grown fast like an aggressive cancer, but these lumps were no tumors. They hurt and they itched. The new parts of me that were growing itched to be free. When I arrived home, my wife knew something was up as soon as I walked in. She said I looked shorter and that I looked like shit. I told her I should quarantine in the attic, something I picked up in Japan. An illness could be contagious. No doctors. I'll ride it out upstairs. I was shorter. My head was closer to my shoulders because my neck had started to retract like I was a fucking turtle. Insects, they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. The head of an arachnid, though, is part of its thorax. It's funny what you remember from your school days sometimes. I told her to bring me steaks. She offered to cook them, but I told her I would use the camping stove and leave the roof window open, so she just left them at the bottom of the ladder. I would descend slowly, spastically, as my new limbs learned their job, to collect the hunks of cow several times a day, and I would suck them dry of that sweet plasma. The 2 black jointed barbs that now protrude from either side of my jaw are like straws, but I could sense they had another purpose, and one that I was eager to try. I leave webs wherever I go. I don't fully understand where they come from. I make no conscious effort. Maybe from the hands at the ends of all my legs. I wonder why I have those when she had feet. It doesn't matter. I am what I am. Soon, the attic was covered in silk as if someone had stuck dusty sheets to everything. I could get anywhere. I'd made a web nest up in the corner of the ceiling where I would sit and wait for a mouse to trip one of the strands. The black spine things that had sprouted from my back and body were sensitive to the tiniest vibrations from the interconnected strings that covered my new home. I could pinpoint where the movement had come from in a second, and be on top of it almost as fast. I snatched the first mouse and stuck it with my barbs, and they showed me their other trick when the venom started to pump into its squirming little body. Soon it stopped kicking, and I sucked up its insides, now more liquid than meat. After days of licking up the cold, dead blood from the steak packaging, this little fella tasted like heaven. Even as the hunger grew stronger and more insatiable, other beastly desires began to manifest. Uncontrollable and sinister urges. I snatched my wife up into my den as she left more meat at the foot of the ladder. She did not like that. Even less what happened next. When I was done, I whipped her up in another corner of the room so she couldn't escape. I have to keep an eye on her. She's going to be a mother now. My babies are growing inside her, and they're already sucking her nutrients dry. Soon they'll spill out of the egg sac and eat her from the inside. I know she's not dead yet because her eyes still follow me around the room. Her belly is swollen with my offspring, but her body is withered, her flesh the color of a plum, and her cheeks sunken. Who looks like shit now? I best get in position under the porch where I've made another opening. When he rings the bell, I'll spring from the trapdoor and pull him down into the tunnels, and I will feast on his liquefied heart and lungs and brain. My children will come soon, and then they will eat their mother. By night, we will leave our nest and make our way across this neighborhood, this land, this earth, taking more mates, more food. Our scuttling legion will grow and grow until this entire world drowns in blood and web.
The Masks We Wear by Mac Ralston. Narrated by Lance's Creepy Reading. I wear a mask every day. Truth be told, we all do. Not literally, of course. Humans have worn masks forever, whether it be for ceremony, protection, fashion, theater, or disguise. Masks are the faces we sometimes don. That's the one thing in common that's shared across all the masks we wear. They conceal. Sometimes we cover our faces because we're afraid. A doctor might wear a mask to avoid germs, as does a welder to stop sparks. Baseball catchers need masks to stop poor pitches, as do divers to prevent fatal accidents. Sometimes, the mask is used for ceremonies, rituals, and dances. On Halloween, tradition holds that sporting a mask confuses wandering spirits. In theater, the arts, masks create characters that veil the actor underneath. At masquerade balls, the ornamental masks were barriers between a person's true self and the person they had to be, allowing the wearer permission to act as they pleased. Even the internet is, in and of itself, a mask, shrouding its users with an anonymous face. As for me, my fascination with masks started when I wore one during my therapy sessions at the clinic. My counselor said they are a useful tool to aid me in seeing my true self. What is my true self? I'd always ask. Your true self is the person you wish to see in the mirror, she would say. The person the mask represents is the person you are inside. Allow yourself to express your true persona. In the mask? I would ask. Yes, she would say. For example, let's suppose that I am your former physician, Dr. Childs. Using the mask, express how you truly feel about me. I was silent. She leaned forward. Pretend I'm Dr. Childs. You aren't you today. You are the mask. Let the mask express how you feel about Dr. Childs, she said, pointing to herself. I hate you, I whimpered, balling my fists. That's good, she said. That's progress. It's okay to feel angry. We all feel angry. Sometimes we just mask our emotions and bottle them up. Mask our emotions? I spoke. Yes, we all do it, she said. But at the end of the day, we feel how we feel. We are who we are. I now know what she meant. How we love to conceal, how we truly feel. I watch waiters be spat on by customers, smiling and nodding when they really want to knock their teeth out. Or how parents shush their screaming kids, sometimes wanting to wring their necks. I see people bite their tongues when they want to scream, hold back tears when they want to cry. No one acts how they truly feel. Well, not me. Not anymore. I decided to take off my mask, to be who I truly am. No longer a slave to Dr. Child's insults and rants. No longer a subject of therapies, medicines, and exams. I'm going to be free. And sometimes that means donning a new mask. I mean, my entire existence has been one. A mask, that is. Day after day, I've lived behind it, grinning through lying teeth as if I were just some normal person. I'm not. I am who I am. I've realized that now. Besides, I like my new mask a whole lot better. This one, far more literal.
The Rats by Mr. Crawley. Written and narrated by Reaper's Horror. They say the old man that lived there, Mr. Crawley, murdered his wife and 3 sons in that very house. He bashed their heads right in with a shovel in the dead of night. Crowley was a God-fearing man, despite what he did to his family. The sins brought forth by his crazed actions were too much for him to bear. He couldn't live with himself after what he had done, so he killed himself. He looped a rope around his neck and hung himself right from the barn's rafters. The only thing is, he didn't tie the rope right, so the poor bastard's neck didn't break when he dropped, nor did he choke to death. He just hung there, not dead, but not able to get himself free either. So what did old man Crawley do? Well, he did the only thing he could do. He screamed for help, but the only people who could have heard his cries were still in the home with their faces caved in. His shrieking must have spooked every rat in the barn, as hundreds of ravenous rodents charged at the man. They tore at his feet, chewed through his boots, and bit all the way to his bones. It took him 3 days before he finally died. When they found his body, the rodents were still gnawing away at his insides, gnashing away with their tiny incisors and devouring what little bits of flesh and meat still held his ragged corpse together. They say his entire property was swarming with them. It is believed that the rodents were the main culprit for Mr. Crawley's loss of sanity. His whole house was infested with them. At night he could hear them, crawling in the walls, scratching at the foundation, and chewing at the wires. He must have lost his damn mind. Mr. Crawley thought there was no way out for his family other than through death. He could hear what sounded like the walls caving in all around them. But in reality, it was the rats. So he did what he thought was right as a father. He did what he thought was right as a husband. In the old man's twisted mind, he was saving his family from an even worse form of death. He was saving them from the rats. Uh-oh. Ah!
I should have never wandered into that for a photo. By you/thatlonelywanderer702. Narrated by Dr. Plague. Photography has always been in my bag of tricks. I love to get out into the wide open and just snap photos. If it's a wildlife, weather, someplace unknown, or getting into that no trespassing area just for a quick shot, well, the latter is one I will never do again, even if almost lost my life. It was a pleasant day in October, and I just got home from work. The air was still fresh with the smells of the outdoors. After I had freshened up, I decided to grab my camera and head out into the wilderness for some photography bliss. The day was light out, and I didn't want to waste any of it. I got to the spot I wanted to start hiking at and made my way in, not knowing of the adventure I was about to really have. About 3 miles in, I came to a huge building, one I have never seen in this area, even though I have trekked this trail many of times. Graffiti lined the exterior and interior. All the windows were smashed, and an overwhelming sense of foreboding came over me. Well, this is new. I should take some shots since I've never came across this, I mumbled to myself. I walked the full grounds, finding anything of interest to take photos of. This place was massive, a good 15,000 square feet, had about 5 dilapidated buildings that were interesting to say the least. Taking a good careful look all into the buildings, I found one that was easy to access. The no trespass sign staring me right in the face. What's there to fear in here? Well, here goes nothing. That would be the single most frightening thing I've ever done. Making my way through the crumbling hallways, snapping photos as I went. That feeling that you aren't alone really didn't hit me until I was well into the building. And it hit me hard. Every 5 minutes, I kept looking over my shoulder, hoping to see someone there. I didn't, but when I stopped walking, it would sound like someone was walking up behind me. We're walking ever so softly, just rustling the paraphernalia on the floor. As I turned around, the noise stopped and I saw no one there. I shrugged it off and kept going, floor after floor, snapping pictures. It was getting dark out, and I still had the basement to explore. Somewhere you don't want to be at night in a dark and creepy building. I started to make my way down to the basement, the feeling of dread getting worse and more thick. As I got to the door, the air was cool, musky, and damp. The door opened with a loud and thunderous wail, probably waking up every forest creature in a 2-mile radius. I walked in and looked around, taking photos every second I could. I noticed a few red stains on the floor and walls, but passed them up to being rust or just the color of old paint that was peeling. I started to make my way out of the basement when I saw one door that I hadn't opened. I walked over and put my hand on the handle. A jolt of electricity coursing through me. I had that instant dread feeling again, but this time it was much thicker. I had to think of what to do if I were to run into someone with a dark intent, but knowing my luck, it wouldn't be that simple. I opened the door to a candlelit room, the air filled with the smell of candles burning and incense. The air was thick, the air you could cut with a large knife. Then I noticed him. A large black mass in the corner, watching my every move. Then I noticed the stains all on the floor and the walls. They were covered in dripping red, and it made me shiver. I made a move to the door and slowly closed, then slammed shut, sealing me in with the figure. I stayed near the door and waited to see what he would do. It wasn't long before he broke his gaze on me and started to move. He came closer, not super close, but to a point to where I could make out what he looked like. 7 feet tall, normal human head with ram horns, and dark, motionless eyes. I stood frozen to the spot. Then it spoke.
Sanguis porpibus super paradem et se fergite et pompidus est,
the figure said, not breaking his gaze. I have no idea how to speak Latin, but he pulled a long, knife-looking weapon, a good 10 to 12 inches long, and pointed it towards me. The air was sucked out of my lungs, and I couldn't breathe, looking at any opportunity to escape. He then made more strides towards me, and I found the closest thing I could to me and threw it at him. It hit him above the eye, and he was dazed enough where I found the door and made a run for it. Running through that hallway was not easy. Everything that could go wrong did. Just then, the most bone-rattling, earth-shattering roar came from behind me as he was making his way through the hallway after me. I ran as fast as I could, hearing this beast not far behind me. I found a small crawl space I was able to fit into to hide and wait. It was the middle of the night, so I would have to wait until daylight to make my move, to get out of here and away from that nightmare in front of me. Morning came and I slowly peeked my head out of the crawl space, hoping to not see this thing waiting for me. I didn't see him, so I gathered myself and got out of the building as fast as I could, not looking back. I got to my car and drove 30 minutes home, thinking of what may have led up to me getting into that predicament. I looked through all the pictures I took of this place, and only one stood out to me. It was in that same building, not in the room I saw this beast, but it was in the most obvious place, right when I walked in, after ignoring the signs on the door. He was standing in the doorway not 5 feet from me. He was fully in the picture, but my own eyes didn't see him. I'll never go back into any abandoned place like that again, even if it's for the thrill of a photo.
Something killed my horse last night, and it almost killed me too. Written and narrated by Miss Creepeth.
Someone told me once that all myths and legends have a degree of truth in them, but I thought it was all just a bunch of bullshit. That included old Native American tales. That is, until I witnessed something that recently changed my mind. I'd been living at my farmhouse in Nebraska. I'd been there for about 5 years now, and all had been peaceful and happy. I even had a black merguez horse. I called her Midnight. The black merguez is such a beautiful breed of horse, and mine was no different in that respect. She had a gorgeous coat and deep black eyes. She even had a personality that matched my own. She was spunky for sure, but she was also loving with those she trusted. I had Midnight since I was in middle school. She was just a foal at the time. I connected with her right away, and she had taken to me quickly too. We went on to become show jumpers in my small town. We never made it to state championships or nationals, but we were happy together nonetheless. I decided to take an early retirement from competing after my father had passed away. Got a PhD in veterinary medicine and worked at a shelter for 6 years. Midnight had been my constant companion. I was closer to her than anyone else in my life. Other than her, my brother, Henry, was the only one I was close with. She would accompany me on my hunting trips, and we'd ride down into town to get bread and groceries. We were inseparable. It was early October, about 2 weeks ago, when Midnight had started to get restless. She was anxious about something. She was unusually hesitant to tread into the forest that surrounded the barn. I clicked my tongue at her and nudged her side to try and calm her, but she would stamp her hooves at me and chuff. I dismounted and walked ahead to the edge of the tree line and waited for her to come to me. After a few minutes, she eventually did. I ran her through a bit of desensitizing and we were soon on our way. For days, she was like that. One evening in particular, Midnight seemed adamant about her position and refused to move. I patted her neck and asked her what was wrong, but she would just stamp and shake her head. I was about to dismount as I usually did, but I heard something that made me stop myself. A low, growling sound was coming from the forest. It was quiet at first, and I had to strain my ears to even hear it. The sound was getting louder and louder as it got closer. I gripped the reins tightly as I noticed a rustling in the leaves. The smell came next. A horrible scent of rotting meat and vomit. It filled my nostrils and nearly made me gag. Then everything went still. The rustling of the leaves had stopped, and I no longer heard the growling noise. All I could hear was the thumping of my heart in my chest and the crisp autumn wind blowing through the trees. I held my breath and I listened. I waited and scanned the trees that were illuminated by the setting sun. Then I heard a shrill scream that sounded almost, but not quite human. Midnight flew into a panic. She stood on her back legs and let out a loud, panicked whinny. I screamed and pulled the reins to the side, trying to get her to run back toward the barn to take cover. I knew she got the message because the next instant we were running in that direction. I snapped the reins and Midnight's pace quickened. I could sense that she was just as frightened as I was. Something was following us, and it was gaining ground quickly. I could hear a loud thumping sound getting closer. It sounded extremely large and heavy. Something cut us off, and Midnight suddenly was knocked off balance. I shrieked with terror as I was tossed from my saddle and thrown through the air. I landed hard on my left wrist and winced with pain. I then heard Midnight's terrified cries, followed by a sharp snapping and a wet squelching sound. And that scream, that horrible human-like scream, it shook me to the core of my very soul. I looked back to see my horse lying motionless on the ground. Her head was twisted the wrong way and her stomach was torn open. Blood poured onto the ground beneath her and stained her perfect black coat. The thing that was hunched over her was the most disturbing thing I'd ever witnessed in my life. It was a horrible creature, an emaciated deer-human hybrid with large antlers and hoofed feet. Its skin stretched taut over its ribs, its stomach shrunken and its face gaunt. Its yellowed eyes were fixed on my horse's body. My Midnight. The creature's bony claws were holding the entrails of my best friend. And it was eating them. I could only stare in stunned silence and horror as I watched this thing devour her internal organs. I could feel tears welling in my eyes as I looked onward in terror. The pain of watching that creature consuming Midnight was too much to handle. I was in shock. It took me several minutes to gather myself and I screamed. The monster turned to look at me, its eyes piercing through my body and filling me with dread. I managed to scramble to my feet and run. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear the thump, thump, thump as it ran after me. I heard that horrible shriek behind me and I screamed as well. I threw myself into the barn, quickly closed the door and locked it behind me. The creature crashed against its heavy wooden frame and clawed at it wildly. I looked around for a weapon and spotted an axe I used for chopping wood. I stood by the door and gripped it tightly on my hands. I panted heavily and prayed. I prayed to any god that might be out there that the monster wouldn't break in. After several minutes that felt like hours, the scraping finally stopped. I heard the beast screech one final time as it slowly walked away. I collapsed on the floor of the barn, dropping the axe and bursting into tears. I could only sit there on my knees and cry as I waited for the sun to rise. When it finally did, I slowly emerged through the doors and exited the barn. My legs were still shaking as I looked around for Midnight, hoping that what I just saw wasn't real. They carried me to where I first laid eyes on the creature. There on the ground was the mangled corpse of my beloved horse Midnight. I looked into her eyes, once gleaming and full of life, now glassy and empty. My vision blurred from my tears and I pressed my forehead against her mane. I screamed. letting out bellow after bellow of pain, anger, and sadness. I screamed until my throat was raw and my energy was sapped. I practically had to drag myself back to the barn to retrieve a shovel. I had to do the same as I returned to Midnight's body. It took me until midday to finish burying her, and I cried the entire time. After I was done, I kneeled beside her grave, tears leaving tracks upon my dirty face as I placed my forehead to the ground. I wished to snuggle against her mane, at least one last time, but all I was met with was the cold, damp earth. "I'm sorry, Midnight," I said through a strained and sore throat. "Please, forgive me." I then put the shovel away and went into the house. It was already dark when I finally awoke. I took a shower and changed into some fresh clothes. The exhaustion caught up to me and I finally collapsed on the couch. While I had slept, I was plagued by nightmares. The creature appeared before me and I could see its horrible eyes hungrily staring at me. I could hear it screeching and smell its sickening odor. The stench of death clung to it like a fog. I probably wasn't in my right mind at the time, but I decided then and there that I was going to try and kill this thing. It was going to pay for killing Midnight. I grabbed my hunting rifle, a handful of spare rounds, a flashlight, and my rabbit's foot necklace. I wore it every time I went hunting, and I needed all the luck in the world right now. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I took my place at the tree line. I was less than 500 meters away from Midnight's fresh grave. I loaded my rifle, turned on my flashlight, and waited for the creature to return. I sat there for what felt like a goddamned eternity before I smelled it. That same smell I remembered, like rotting meat mixed with vomit. Then I heard it. The telltale growling, low at first, warning me to stay away. I raised my rifle and looked around through the scope, searching carefully for those glowing yellow eyes. The growling grew louder as it got closer. I held my breath and concentrated on the task at hand. "There you are," I said as I saw the glow of its eyes emerge from the trees. I aimed right at them and fired. I heard a screech, that high-pitched infernal scream of a wounded beast. I pulled back the bolt on my rifle and fumbled in my pocket for more rounds. I could hear the sound of it getting closer as I quickly tried to reload. Thump, thump, thump. "Shit!" I said as I struggled with my rifle. I finally managed to get the bolt back into place just in time to see the monster emerge from the trees. I raised my rifle and fired again, but this shot only seemed to graze it. It only jolted it. The creature recovered fast and ran straight towards me. I ditched the rifle and scrambled to my feet, but I was too slow. The creature raised its arm and brought it down right on top of me. I felt a searing hot pain. And then I was somewhere else. I was surrounded by a forest. It was light outside and there were trees everywhere. I could see the sun peeking through the trees, creating beautiful rays of light upon the leaves and branches. It was a sea of orange, red, and yellow all around me. A light breeze played through them. It was both warm and calming. A sound pierced my eardrums, breaking the once peaceful atmosphere. It was a loud, echoing whinny coming from the distance. "Midnight?" I called out. I looked around until I spotted her, pure black, standing not too far from me, stamping her feet on the ground and calling to me. "Midnight!" I called out excitedly as I ran toward her, but as soon as I got close, she turned and began to run away. Her hooves thumped loudly against the ground, filling my ears with a thump, 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 thump. It was like the creature's, but with more rhythm to it. I slowed to a stop. I was both confused and sad. Then she turned and chuffed at me. I felt a sort of tugging on my mind, a strange feeling passing over me. But it felt right. Follow her, that's what it was telling me. So I did. I ran after Midnight, and as I did, I felt a pain begin to sting my eyes. I felt my body weaken and sag, but I kept running. I continued to run until the pain hit me at full force in the moment. Everything was dark. I couldn't see a damn thing, but I could hear the creature. It must have thought I was dead and no longer a threat. It hadn't eaten me yet, but I thought for sure I was going to die at any moment. That's when I heard it. That same distant thump, thump, thumping from before. It was quiet, but I could hear it coming from the direction I was facing. I dragged myself to my feet, and I began to run. My arms out in front of me to guide my blinded self. I heard the monster screaming from behind me. It was infuriated for being denied its fresh meal. As I listened to the ground beneath me, I noticed the crunching of leaves, freshly fallen leaves from the forest. It dawned on me then as I continued to follow the hoofbeats and braying. It was midnight. The old stories I'd heard were true, and midnight was leading me away from the creature. I ran more confidently now, somehow managing to avoid crashing into trees, but still tripping over fallen logs and branches. I caught myself on brambles and low-hanging tree limbs and was nearly grabbed by the creature many times. My mind was clear of everything but the sound of hoofbeats and the crunching of leaves under my own 2 feet. I then began to smell something new. I stopped and smelled the air. Was it gasoline? No. Exhaust. Where was I? I listened, but I could hear nothing except the crickets and birds around me, as well as my heart pounding in my chest. The hoofbeats were gone now, but so was the monster. I walked until the ground changed from earth to pavement. I was on a road now, I realized. I kept walking, calling out to anyone, hoping someone would hear me. The sound of an engine made my ears perk up, and I felt my heart flutter. I began to wave my arms wildly and shout as I heard it getting closer. I heard the vehicle slow to a stop, and its door open. "Hey, are you okay?" A man's voice called out to me. I need to get to a hospital. Please, I can't see," I cried. When I finally got to the hospital, I asked someone to call my brother. I told Henry what had happened, but he didn't believe me. I am irreparably blind now. The monster destroyed my sight and took away my best friend, but I know my Midnight is still out there, watching out for me and protecting me from harm. She saved my life, so I will honor hers. Thank you, my girl.
My wife and I have been playing hide and seek for 3 days straight by Blair Daniels, narrated by 𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸. I don't know what to do. In the past 72 hours, my life has been turned upside down. Our family has been thrown into chaos. My wife is missing, and I fear she'll never return. Let me start from the beginning. My wife and I started playing hide and seek with our 2 young kids. However, they were a little too young to hide effectively. They always hide in the same spot every time. So we found it's more fun for one of us parents to hide and then the rest of us seek. I've hidden from my wife and kids just by standing completely still in the corner of a dark room. It's amazing how our brains are programmed to see things that move. My wife gets a little more creative, but it's hard for us to do anything too elaborate because the kids are not very cooperative in waiting for us to hide. One Tuesday evening after work, we decided to play. My wife decided to hide first. I counted down from 10 with the kids holed up in the downstairs office. Ready or not, here I come. The kids bounded out of the room like wild dogs. I followed, slowly trying to get a sense of where my wife was hiding. I'd often try to figure out what room she was hiding in first, to gently guide the kids so that we wouldn't find her too soon, or spend too long looking for her. I saw her when I entered the living room. She was crouched behind the couch. I could see a bit of her elbow poking out from behind the upholstery. The kids walked right past her, too intent on checking the kitchen. I waited for them to return. As they walked back and rounded the couch, I waited for them to squeal in delight. Except they didn't. Confused, I approached the couch. She wasn't there. Maybe I'd seen a tag or something poking out, or maybe she'd moved her hiding spot. Wouldn't be the first time. As I said, she's more creative at this than I am. So we moved on. We checked all the usual spots, underneath the shelving in the garage, behind the kitchen door, even in the lower kitchen cabinets. She wasn't in any of those spots. Maybe she went upstairs. I hadn't heard her go upstairs, but she can creep pretty quietly. I walked along the hallways, the kids in tow. "Jesse," I called in a sing-song voice. "We're going to find you." "Gotcha." Our bedroom door was open, and there was a long, just-shaped lump under the covers. "Let's check Mom and Dad's bedroom," I said to the kids, pattering footsteps as they charged behind me. I reached for the light switch, flicked on the lights, then grabbed the hem of the comforter and yanked it off. My heart dropped. The bed was empty. I stared down in confusion. It must have just been bunched up weirdly, but I could have sworn it looked like a person under there. The rough shape of someone in a fetal position, legs bent, back curved. I backed out of the room. The kids and I went downstairs. "Jess," I called out. "We can't find you. Come on out." Nothing. The kids lost interest. They bounded into the family room and began playing with their cars. I was about to call out to her again when I noticed the chain of the basement door lock was disengaged. Aha! As I approached, my heart hammered in my chest. I knew she was waiting on the other side, waiting to jump out at me and give me a heart attack. She'd done that before. I took a deep breath and swung open the door. She wasn't there. Damp air wafted from the basement. I clicked on the light. "Jess?" I called out. No answer. "The kids aren't playing anymore," I called down. "And you shouldn't be hiding down there anyway. These stairs are too dangerous." Nothing. I turned about to close the door, but then something caught my eye. Black hair, poking through the gap between the stairs and about halfway down. She's hiding under the stairs. I stepped down. The wood creaked under my weight. The hair glistened below me in the dim yellow light. I continued down the steps, avoiding stepping on her hair until I was standing on the concrete floor. I whirled around. Aha! But the space under the stairs was empty. My blood ran cold. "Jess, this isn't funny," I shouted. "Stop playing games with me." A footstep sounded behind me. I whirled around. The naked bulb in the ceiling only lit half the basement. The other half, where we had rows and rows of storage boxes, was in near total darkness. But I squinted, trying to make it out. In the murky darkness, behind a stack of boxes in the corner, I thought I could see her standing there. I could only see her in my peripheral vision, like how you can only see dim stars when you're not looking right at them because of how your optic cells are arranged. I focused on one of those storage boxes, really stared at it, and when I did, I realized I could see her pale calves extending up into the darkness. As I stood there, I realized I could hear her breathing. "I can see you there," I said, my voice wavering. "Why are you being so weird? The kids aren't even playing anymore, so come out, please." Deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew there was something wrong. Something horribly wrong, so I chickened out. "I'm going upstairs. You can join me when you're ready." I headed for the stairs, but halfway there the bulb flickered and went out. Total darkness surrounded me. I stretched my hands out, blindly groping into the darkness. They only fell on air. I frantically pawed through the air, searching for something, anything. My fingers caught on something. Hair. I screamed and yanked my hands back. Then I ran blindly into the darkness. But something glanced off me. I shoved at it. I heard a dull thwack, and then I kept running. The side of the banister caught me straight in the chest. Panting, I felt my way to the stairs and climbed them as fast as I could. Then I locked the door to the basement and frantically ran to my kids. They were fine, but as I hugged them, I couldn't get the horrible thought out of my mind. The hair I had felt, it was higher than my eye level, about 6.5 feet off the ground. Jess is only 5'2". The police searched the entire house. My wife isn't here. They searched the backyard and patrolled in a 3-mile radius. They came back empty-handed. It's like she disappeared off the face of the earth. Except, last night as I rolled over in bed, I swear my fingers touched something warm.
Shred by Reaper's Horror, read by Spooky Boo Rhodes. It was about 3 a.m. when Amanda was awoken by a disturbing noise coming from the kitchen. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before, and it was getting closer. She shook her husband in an attempt to wake him, but it was no use. Her fear only worsened as the source of the noise revealed itself. The strange being came into their bedroom. It had a large head, great big eyes like an insect, and its skin was entirely gray from head to toe. She was horrified by its presence. It pointed a long, spindly finger at her sleeping husband. "Shred," came a voice in her mind. Amanda didn't understand what the being was trying to tell her, but she knew it was a command of some sort. She tried to wake her husband, whom was laying asleep in bed next to her, but it was no use. As a last resort, she dug her nails deep into her husband's arm. She scraped at his chest and clawed violently at his skin, but even that had no effect. "Shred," the voice said again, only this time it was much louder. "Shred, shred, shred, shred." The voice kept repeating in her head, getting louder and louder each time. Amanda tried to wake her husband again. She shook him and scratched him all over in a frenzy, but nothing worked. "Shred, shred, shred," the voice screamed in her head. This time it was so loud she thought her head would explode. "Shred!" it yelled once more, before finally coming to a stop. It was 9:30 in the morning when she was woken by the buzzing of the alarm clock. Her heart was still pounding, and her body was covered in sweat. Amanda laughed off the events as just being a bad nightmare, probably the worst she had ever experienced. She sat up and noticed that her hands were covered in blood. Slowly, she turned to look over at her husband. His whole body was shredded to pieces. His wounds were so devastating that she could see his bones and exposed organs, some of which even hung off the bed and touched the floor. She then realized that it was not a nightmare. The events of that night had actually happened. She had shredded her husband to pieces just as she was commanded.
The Devil Owns a Chainsaw. Written and performed by The Scary Show. Silence followed the heavy thud made by the chainsaw, placed upon the hardware store's counter. An awkward stare down, and a shift in the wind's direction later. The clerk behind the counter swallowed and answered,
"I'm sure it can, but it ain't meant to."
The question: does it cut through bones? You have heard people say that artists are tortured souls. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that some tormented souls are artists. Either way, there seems to be a remarkably apparent link between artists and various forms of traumatic stress. Art, in a multitude of mediums, can be readily explored as an outlet for such stress. It is readily available as a coping tool, even to those who may not feel that they have any artistic skill whatsoever. For creatives, the effects of trauma can often be longer lasting and more intense due to their inclination to keep thinking on it. Something I have often thought about over the years is the experience I had watching my first horror movie in a theater. You may have heard that the devil wears ruby-colored pajamas. You've probably seen artist depictions of the devil wielding a 3-pronged pitchfork, ready to jab some jabroni in the ass cheeks. While I cannot speak on what the devil does or does not wear to bed, my childhood self could tell you with absolute certainty that the devil did not use a 3-pronged pitchfork. No. The devil owns a chainsaw. I was a child, younger than 10 for certain. My legal guardian took me to a movie theater somewhere in San Francisco's Mission District to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Can I have some Reese's Pieces?
What started out as a fun theater visit,
Thank you.
just like the one I was previously taken on to see the movie Bambi for the first time, would soon prove to be far from it. I remember the coercive smell of hot buttered popcorn, sold in striped cartons, a scent that I still to this day associate with going to the movies. In my covetous little hands, however, I held the treat that I could never seem to get enough of after seeing the movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Reese's Pieces. The carpet of the theater lobby was carmine, with grand patterns sewn into it, seemingly spanning the length of the building's interior in all directions. The cushioned chairs inside the theater were a dusty maroon, with spring-loaded seats that flipped up when you stood. My legal guardian led me by one hand as I held my Reese's Pieces in the other to where we found our seats, somewhere in the aisle, in the middle. I hopped up onto my seat, my legs dangling above the sticky theater floor below. I would have been jabbering on endlessly to deaf ears about the Smurfs or some other Saturday morning cartoon that I watched religiously back then, whilst filling my face with the candy-coated, peanut buttery goodness. And before long, the lights dimmed, the coming attractions played, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre began. The next thing I remember is coming to my senses outside of the movie theater, crying hysterically, shaking, traumatized, scarred. It would be years before I forgave my legal guardians for that. Years before I could sleep through the night without being plagued by nightmares. I would be as a man afflicted until the day I bought my first chainsaw.
We hope you enjoyed your stay at the Carnival of Horror.
Buy some popcorn on your way out, and join us again sometime. Even if you're dead.
That's it. I'm going to bury your bones, Reaper.
Uh-oh. Ah! Ah! Ah!